Hello everyone, welcome on in to ClayShareCon Day 3. We have a really fun tutorial up next. We have Carmen Allen from Mako joining us, and she is going to teach you how to use and tint Magma and Mudcrack texture glazes. So I've used them a teeny tiny bit, but I'm really excited to see what else we can do with these, as I am sure you are excited to see as well. So let's send it all over to Carmen. Hey, how you doing, Carmen? Nice to see you this morning.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate being on here to showcase these for you guys, and thanks everyone for tuning in today.
Well, we love having you.
Awesome. So I can just go ahead and start just reviewing sort of the basics about our texture glazes if you're not familiar. And then I just want to go through showcasing a couple different samples, kind of discussing the performance of these products. But to start, I will go over our Magma glazes here. So this side is our Magma glazes. Here, it's basically just a really dry finish and crater textured product that you're going to have. And the texture actually builds up as the thickness of the glaze builds up here. So if you see here, I've got 1, 2, and 3 coats. And with 3 coats, you're going to have a lot more dimension and texture. And if you have 1 coat, it's going to be more of like a sandpaper kind of texture happening here. And if you notice here, also the color does shift a little bit as you build the thickness of the application. So this glaze can be used in a variety of ways. It has a little bit of variation just in the glaze itself. And then here we have our dark magma. So the dark magma is going to perform just very similar to the light magma. As the thickness builds up, you're going to get a little bit more texture. And then on the back here, we have kind of the side-by-side of each glaze. Typically, honestly, the dark magma tends to puff up a little bit more than the light magma, but both of these results seem to be pretty even. And if anything, I think the light magma has a little bit more texture, but that's kind of just like the foundational basics of the magma glaze. And then here we have our Mudcrack glazes. So we've got a white and a black Mudcrack. And similar to the magmas, the texture does build up as you apply thicker coats. So you're going to get a really, really subtle texture here. This almost doesn't even really have anything, just like a flat color. And then you build up as the thickness increases. And on the back here, we've just got 3 coats. All of these samples that I'm showcasing are fired to cone 6. And then here we can talk about some of these other samples. And I would like to do a Mudcrack application demo because we do get a lot of questions with that. The Mudcrack in the jar does have kind of like a variety of consistencies that happen. Here I've got some new jars, which is what these were done with. So it's nice and easy. But sometimes if the jar has been sitting for a little bit, it can get a little bit thick. So I did want to showcase what you need to pay attention to when you're applying Mudcrack if it happens to be a little bit thicker than a new jar.
So I just want to let you know, Carmen, that Kevin told me that we lost your front camera. We only have the overhead, which is okay. We just need to be aware so that you know.
Cool. Sweet. Awesome. Well, I will just do that then. That's fine, because we're just going to go over these samples anyway. But thanks for letting me know. Okay, so here we have, I just want to go over a couple more properties of these glazes, and then we'll go into the more detailed samples. So here we have just one of our stoneware vases, the sandstone, light magma, and then dark magma. One thing that I wanted to note here is just that the dark magma tends to fume. So it looks really, really nice if you leave some bisque area around the magma. And also keep in mind, if you're loading it in a kiln, if it's really close to something, it could fume on that. So you do want to leave ample space in the kiln if you're loading the dark magma. But it does have this, it's beautiful if you know it's going to happen. So definitely try testing it out like that. And then a little bit of performance variation with the Mudcracks I have here. When you apply it on a darker clay body, you tend to get more of like a beading effect with it. So here's a better example actually. So it kind of plumps up a little more and spaces itself out a little bit more, rather than on the dark or on the light clay, you're going to get a little bit smoother of a surface. And so we decided to do this today here because we do get questions all the time on how to color and tint these texture glazes, since we do only offer them in a light and a dark. A lot of people, want to showcase different colors with that. So first I can review our Magma results. All right, so first here, let's see. I don't know which to do first. Let's do the with gloss glazes. So here I have, this is when I sandwiched the gloss in between the magma. So I've got 2 coats of light magma, 1 coat of our blue gloss glaze. So our stoneware gloss glazes right here. And then 2 more coats of the light magma. And so this tints the magma. As you can see, it's a little bit different, but it also does affect a little bit of the texture here. So keep in mind when you're layering any of our texture glazes with other glazes, it will affect the texture. You're adding a gloss, maybe some mobility to this glaze. So it is going to affect the texture a little bit. We found that the sandwiching method kind of affected the texture the least, as opposed to if I just layered it underneath a certain glaze or on top of a different glaze. So here we still get a little bit of a texture, some shine. It's not quite as bright blue as this is, but it does create this pretty gray color. And this sample that I have here also, this was done with our red gloss in the same fashion. So sandwiching the gloss in between the magma. So nice, kind of a subtle change there. And then here I have the light magma underneath the blue gloss. So here's kind of the difference in the texture, color, and finish, showcasing if you're sandwiching it versus if you just apply the gloss on top. So you can see here the gloss does affect the color a little bit more, as well as have a little bit more of a shine to it. But
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just a few folks are asking, is it food safe that are new to the mud, crack, and magma glazes?
So all of our glazes are technically food safe, but we do not recommend these for dinnerware surfaces. So they don't leach anything harmful, but of course this surface is really dry. It's very cratered. And if you started poking at it, there's some thin spots, so it could start chipping away. So that's why we do not recommend any of these for dinnerware surfaces or surfaces that come directly into contact with food. And that's just simply just kind of like a reasonable consideration of just paying attention to the texture here, because it is really, really dry and a little volatile. But great question. I definitely should have just mentioned that right off the bat. So
no, it just came up. And then do you, on your Instagram, do you have stills of these, or do you have samples on Mako of photo samples of these that you're showing here so folks can see them?
These I just recently did. We do have a video on our YouTube channel where I review the similar testing results. So with underglazes, with gloss glazes, with stroke and coats, I kind of review all of the different results with that just to showcase the performance. So actually the spectrum in that video is going to be a bit broader than what I'm even showcasing here. Here I just kind of got like the best of the things that affected it the most, but while still remaining texture. So definitely check out our YouTube channel if you want to see some more results with our texture glazes.
Thank you.
All right, so here I thought this one was very interesting because here we have our magma glaze underneath an underglaze. So it definitely affected the texture a lot, but still creates this really interesting, like I call it like a paper crinkle surface. So here I just layered 3 coats of our magma and then one coat of our leaf green underglaze, and this is the results from that. Which this is even more volatile. This I would definitely just recommend for sculptural work. Because as you might be able to tell here, like if I press on here, it kind of starts crunching. So something that's not going to be used, just sitting on a shelf, but it is a really, really cool texture that happens here. And then finally, for tinting our magma glazes, the last thing I have is adding pigments or stains. So this one I was actually really surprised about, because when we first developed these glazes and we did this testing, the stains that we used fired out. So I used a blue and a green, like colors that I would expect to hold up at those temperatures. And basically this stayed white, but then I had a halo of the color around it. So when I did these tests, I just tried them just for the heck of it. And this came out so vibrant. I was honestly just so surprised, but I'm super excited about it too, because we get questions all of the time asking if you can add mason stains or pigments to our magma glazes to color them. And we usually say that it fires out, but this is very vibrant. So I'm really excited to showcase this. I did have a pretty heavy loading of the stain just because I had previous results that didn't showcase it very well. So perhaps I just overloaded the color, but these turned out really well. The texture is affected a bit on this one where I used the blue. So we still have that sandpaper texture, but I did put 3 nice heavy coats on here. So the texture is being affected by the color. Whereas the orange, it didn't seem to really affect the texture all that much. But the color is very vibrant. So definitely worth some testing. If you happen to have some stains around the studio and you want it to be a little bit more matchy with other glazes that you're using it with, the stains are going to enhance or change the color of the magmas. And probably not the dark magma. I mean, you know, it might affect it really subtly, but this is a really strong, deep color. So changing this color would be a little bit more difficult. You might be able to tint it a bit, but this one you can change completely by using the stains.
So asking about dinnerware appropriation, would it be okay if you put clear on top of it? Would it change it and then they'd be safe, like seal them up?
So the clear would still, it wouldn't necessarily seal it. It's kind of like, so if you see this here, so here I put just a stoneware gloss glaze on top of this. So this does make the texture much smoother because you get a bit of a gloss on it, and the cratering is tighter. So instead of having this like deep cratering that can chip off, this is still tighter. So I mean, I guess if you wanted to do it on like the outside of a piece, perhaps it would hold up better with washings and things like that. But I still wouldn't say it's good for using on a surface that's directly coming into contact with food, just because you have this like pretty vigorous surface texture happening here. So bits of food can get stuck in there. And so just like sanitizing and cleaning, that would kind of be more of an issue if you apply clear. But that's a great question, honestly. We do get asked a lot, actually, if adding a clear will make our non-dinnerware recommended glazes dinnerware safe. And unfortunately, the answer to that is no, because there's always an interaction. They're melting together. That doesn't guarantee the clear. The clear doesn't just sit on the top and seal it, kind of like it does with low fire. You're promoting interaction with those glazes. So it does, with this one particular example, it definitely does seal it more, but it's not just like this layer or barrier on the top, like it seems like it should be.
And kind of related to that, a question, could you use them on the outside of mugs and bowls then if you're not going to use on the inside?
That also is just kind of up to your personal discretion. Like I said, these are technically food safe. They don't leach anything toxic. So keeping in mind, the different clay bodies you're using are going to affect it differently. So if my mud crack looks like this, like that's pretty tight. It's not chipping off or anything. It's sealed. Any of that exposed clay is vitrified because it's a nice stoneware body that's been fired up to its mature temperature. So this is something that I would say would probably be a bit more reasonable to put on the outside of a dinnerware piece. Whereas this, even with washing and handling, you run the risk of like chipping off this texture. So this one, you know, I can't say yes or no exactly what to do, but I personally would not want this on the outside of dinnerware. You can try for yourself if you want to. If you do want to do it on the outside of dinnerware, I would say adding a glaze on top of it so it's a little bit smoother, because this is a lot tighter. It's not going to break. It's not going to chip. Same with this. But like, let's say we have it on this here. So you're using a brown clay body, and you see here, these are hollow. These are just bubbles that are happening here. So this is a bit more volatile and harsher of a surface texture to be putting something that's being used and washed and all of that. So that's just kind of like, I guess, the advice I can give in that regard, but ultimately it's going to be up to you whether you think you want that on a piece of dinnerware. Okay, any more questions right now? I can move on and talk about
is there a difference in the texture of magma between cone 5 and cone 6? And if you go higher, will it maintain the texture?
Yes, yeah. So we have done tests with this all the way up to cone 10. And cone 10 results, it is like almost like a tighter finish, sort of like how we're seeing on this one here, because it's melting more. When you get to cone 5, I would say it almost doesn't quite bubble as much. So you get kind of less texture, although it's still going to be dry and have variation to it. So there is a bit of variation with this performance. We do have cone 10 results of all of our stoneware glazes on our website. Unfortunately, we don't have the cone 5 results featured there. You'll have to just kind of take my word for the fact that there's like a little bit less texture when you're doing cone 5 with them. And same with the mud cracks too. The mud cracks, they're going to be a little bit drier at cone 5. As you can see, like this is a matte finish. So a lot of things that are matte at cone 6 like this, they're a little more matte at cone 5. So cone 5 is going to make this a little bit more matte, maybe not suction to the surface as well. And then going up to cone 10, these guys hold up really, really nice and are nice and shiny, but still remain with this texture.
So back with the mud crack, if you fire it mid-fire, then refire to low fire with clear, would that help make it? I think people really want to try to use it on dinnerware.
I mean,
some glazes just aren't meant for it. I mean, they are great and they have a purpose, but it's just, if you are using a glaze that could bubble or chip off while somebody's eating, if you give somebody something like a mug and a bubble of that glaze pops off while they're holding it, they're going to cut themselves, you know, or if it's inside their plate. I just, you know, sometimes we just accept that some glazes have their uses.
Yeah, and honestly, by putting the clear on top of it and refiring to 06, anytime I've done that, I get like profuse crazing on my pieces. So putting a clear on a stoneware piece and firing to cone 6, like those don't fit together. So you are kind of creating almost more texture in that instance. And not to mention that it's going on top of this other like kind of weird glaze. So that would probably promote even more crazing. So, I mean, again, feel free to test anything. Like I said, these are not toxic. So if you can get it so that it's tight on the surface and it's not going to be chipping off, like that's kind of like the premise of putting it on dinnerware, I would say. So this is a good.
Would you say these hold up outside on sculpture?
I would say the mud crack would. The magma, because like I wish you could feel like how dry it is. Like it's like a very, very porous surface. So I think over time that this would degrade perhaps. Although maybe just if you just live somewhere that has like rain, maybe that wouldn't affect it. I know like freezing is never good for ceramic, especially something that can be saturated with water, and then you have something freezing in it, and that's going to crack the surface off of that. But I mean, I can break this off like with my hand if I poke on it. So this is like a really good thing to be used for sculptural work that's not getting handled a lot or having a lot of traffic happening to it. Whereas the Mudcrack is more, it's like much tighter. And if the clay body underneath is vitrified, then it's a pretty solid, not porous surface.
Okay, let's go on.
All right. Okay, so the coloring the Mudcracks. So we have a couple different results here. With the Mudcracks, I never ended up with something that was like, it's surefire awesome all of the time. But I do want to kind of go over some things just to kind of get your gears going, thinking about it. If you want to be doing it, then feel free. But just so you understand the performance of the glaze. So here first, let's go over with underglazes. So here I have underglaze applied underneath the Mudcrack, and here I have underglaze applied over the Mudcrack. So as you can see, the different layering does affect the firing results pretty significantly. A lot of the time when I put underglaze on top of Mudcrack, the Mudcrack kind of like starts popping off. So that's something you definitely want to test with. I have spoken to a lot of customers that have success with this. So I think that perhaps I just didn't choose a good color for it either. So you can see it does color it a little bit, but you can still see that white coming through. So I was pretty reserved with my underglaze application because a lot of the time I've had my Mudcrack pop off with that, but I have spoken with customers that have had success this way. So if you do want to color this a certain color, I would definitely recommend doing some testing, put a kiln brick or something nice underneath it, because if that pops off, it's definitely going to be sticking to your shelf. So the underglaze on top, it's a maybe, you know, do some testing. Underglaze underneath, it doesn't affect the color on top at all. And actually, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you can really tell how much the Mudcrack kind of pulls. And you can kind of see the Mudcrack pattern like underneath it. So it's not going to provide like a solid background by putting the underglaze behind it. Usually we just recommend to put the Mudcrack directly on the bisque, and that's going to have the most success, where you can see it here as well as on this sample here. It just kind of performs better with the texture if it's just directly on the bisque and not on another glaze. So if you have, maybe if you applied the underglaze on the greenware and fired it, that would create a good bisque surface for you to do it on. I should have done that test. I just thought of it while I was talking right now. So
something to do now.
Yeah, I'll add it to the list. And then here we have a couple more results. So this I found really interesting. This is actually layering black Mudcrack under white Mudcrack. And then you get blue Mudcrack. So we kind of discovered it here where we, on this piece where we had a little bit of overlap with these. And it was just like this really happy accident that we were really surprised to see this gorgeous like sky blue color come of all of it. And the texture still looks pretty good. It's a little bit rounder than I would say I'm used to seeing with Mudcrack, but it's still nice and dimensional, really smooth, and really sticks to that surface. So this is something that's also really, really secure and stuck on the surface, which is really nice. And then here I have the Mudcrack over our gloss glazes. So with the light Mudcrack, the color does come through a little bit because the light Mudcrack isn't always like completely opaque. And then the black Mudcrack, it does seem to affect the texture a little bit and pull a bit on the underneath color. So I would definitely say putting the Mudcracks over the gloss glazes performs a lot better for coloring the background than say like doing an underglaze. Unless you do the underglaze and fire it to bisque, because if you guys do that, hit me up. I like to see it. So yeah, so that's layering it underneath or on top of different things. And then I did also try the stains with the Mudcrack, and this is kind of what I was more expecting. So you can see how the stain just completely fired out. Like I had the same amount in this one and in this one, and the composition just sort of ate the color. But you can see it a little bit, I guess. Maybe I could have put more in, but I felt like I was pretty heavily loading it anyway. I think I was putting about like 2 tablespoons to like 2 tablespoons of stain to like maybe a 1/4 cup of glaze. So it was pretty saturated.
You're just using a mason stain with that?
Yep, yeah. So I have a mason stain and then some other kind of stain. So this one is like a mason stain, the orange here, and then this is like another brand of stain. But any sort of like pigment or stain that you're using in ceramic, definitely feel free to try it out. But I thought it was interesting. I got contradictory results with the different stains. So this is the mason stain, which seemed to hold up better. So I'm not sure if it was particularly the color or just the brand of stain that the Mudcrack didn't quite eat it as much. The Mudcrack did bubble more than usual with this, but it's also really cool, and it's really tight to the bisque. But these do seem to be hollow. So I'm sure something like this is something that I would be hesitant for dinnerware because the really rigorous texture here, as well as the fact that these are hollow, then you could run the risk of popping them and someone cutting themselves or something like that. All right. Do you have any more questions right now, or I can go through a application demo with our Mudcrack?
So we do have a few questions. This person can't get the stoneware clear crackle to crackle, even when using India ink after firing. Should they use it similar to the way Mudcrack and Magma are being used?
I think so. The clear crackle, I'm assuming it's the matte crackle. Sometimes if it doesn't crack, that is because the clay body like fits it too well. That one, the matte crackle, I've honestly not had as many issues with it not crackling as I have with some other crackle glazes. So if you want to do some tests, maybe make sure you're applying it a little bit thicker. So sometimes if you're applying a matte clear glaze, you brush it on really, really thin because you don't want to have any of that cloudiness. But with this matte crackle clear, you kind of just have to put it on a lighter clay body and apply it nice and heavy, because if you apply it heavy, it is going to have a little bit of cloudiness, but it is going to guarantee that the cracking happens more often. And if applying it heavier still doesn't help you, then I would take the piece out and like put it in the freezer or something. You kind of want to shock that piece, or maybe pour some hot water in it to kind of like encourage that glaze to start breaking up and crackling. But typically what I've noticed when I'm glazing is that I'm trying to brush it out too thin. And if I apply it thicker, then it starts cracking more.
Perfect. And so another question, this person used black Mudcrack and it flaked right off. What did they do wrong?
That is what I want to talk about in this application demo, because we do have that.
Perfect segue.
So I would like to kind of review the things that you need to pay attention to avoid that from happening. Because it is kind of characteristic. It's basically just because the glaze is too thick. But there's some little tricks that we can all kind of focus on in our application to avoid that. I do have a video on YouTube going over this kind of application technique. It's not really a technique, it's just like application advice, I guess. Just to make sure everyone's successful with their Mudcrack. So do you want to ask another question before I go into this?
We had a question on the orange sample. You showed the mason stain. Did you mix it in with the Mudcrack or brush it on top?
I mixed it in. So any of these mason stain samples, I took like about 1/4 cup of glaze, about 2 tablespoons of mason stain, and then I just mixed it in and brushed it on. So all of these had everything mixed in. I haven't tried applying it on top, actually.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so here I have a couple different jars. So this is a newer jar of Mudcrack, which if you get a jar of Mudcrack, you definitely need to shake it a lot. A lot of the time it'll be kind of like gelatinous in the jar. And a lot of the time you'll have to mix a lot of water in it. Sometimes you almost like double your pint, because like if you have one that's like 2 years old or something that you've opened and haven't touched for a while, it will thicken. So you just want to make sure to mix some water in it to make sure it's brushable, but you don't necessarily have to get it to be like this consistency. So this is like really thin for Mudcrack, but this is kind of like how it comes like right off the press. So nice and liquidy here. So I'm going to go ahead and start applying it here. And then I do have another jar here that I've been using for a while, but as you can see, like this is thick. So this is kind of what happens to this glaze over time. And it's just kind of the nature of the beast, unfortunately, but there are skills that you can learn to deal with this a little bit better. That isn't just constantly pouring water into this product. So first here, I'm just going to apply one coat of the thinner version. So all of this is basically just paying attention to how it's drying. This thin one will take a little bit longer to dry. And if you have a really thick one, or I'll go over the application with the thick one first. So here, I've got my thick one, and I don't want to just glop it on because then I'm going to end up having the Mudcrack kind of come off of my piece. So I'm trying to thin it as fast as I can. So you can see this one, it's drying like as soon as I put it on. So if you want to add water into this, you can, to not have to like race the clock on your application. You could also saturate this bisque piece. So if I got my bisque piece a little wet or had another glaze underneath it, that's going to make it dry a little slower. So you can hopefully see that it's already cracking. So this is when I'm like, okay, it's starting to dry, I see these really fine cracks. So this is still kind of thin, but I need to get my next coat on it before it dries all of the way, because then I'm just going to start brushing it off. So I'm putting my next coat on. Again, paying attention to the dryness and even like where I'm putting my glaze. So there's like some spots that are a little bit thicker that I might not need to put as much glaze on. So there I've got my second coat on. I've just put it on this interior part here. And so this, I'll wait and watch it and let it dry and see if I need to put another coat on. And this happens really, really quickly. So usually with Mudcracks, basically I advise have your kiln loaded, ready to go, or like have your kiln open and be like, okay, I'm going to put this Mudcrack on and then I'm going to put it directly in the kiln. I don't want this to like sit on a shelf and then me having to move it again, because if you're on the outside of a vertical piece, it can start popping off. So this is like the perfect Mudcrack application here. You can see the chunks are pretty spread apart, but they're not totally curling up. If I were to put, let's say I put another coat on here, I'll show you the curling up. And that's just, again, from it being really thick. And if you look at this one here, this guy's still not cracking. So this is like a really, really new pint, which I know is really hard to get because there's a lot of travel that has to happen with glazes before it actually gets into your hands. So this Mudcrack being like this is not the usual, I guess. Usually you have it to be a little bit thicker, but when it's fresh, it's really easy to use. So here we go. We got our second coat. And this, since I know how it's performing and I know it's nice and thin, this one I don't have to quite watch it as much as I do this one. So this one here, I can set it aside and let it dry. It's not going to start curling up immediately, but I don't want it to dry completely in between my coats because I can still pull up the Mudcrack once it's all the way dry. So this you want to keep an eye on. This one you basically almost like don't even set down, you know, it's like, so you can see here, these edges are starting to curl up. And that's how I know my Mudcrack is like pretty thick. And as this dries more, if it continues to curl, I would just disregard it and maybe try again with a more saturated piece. If they only curl up like this, it's very likely in the firing that they'll just melt down onto the piece. So if it's really, really curling up and like kind of almost falling off of your piece, it's going to keep falling off. So don't even put that in your kiln. But if it just has these like little curls on the edge, that's how you want it nice and thick, because it's like if I want it to be, have a lot of texture like this, you do want it to be thick enough like that, but not to the point that it's like curling up off of your piece.
And if they're applying the glaze and it's too thick, can they dilute it with some water?
For sure. Yeah. So like sometimes you'll get a pint and like, let's say it's like a year old or something, and you open it and the whole pint is like this consistency and maybe even thicker than this. So in that instance, I would just like cut my pint in half and put it in another container and mix water in with it. I really like to you can mix water in here and shake it. I really like to use like an immersion blender because that kind of just saves you the elbow grease of shaking something vigorously for 30 minutes. And then you get 2 pints of Mudcrack.
That's right.
So yeah, definitely add water. I really do encourage you to do that. Like you can see here, this guy here is, it's pretty thin. So I typically just advise to thin it to the point of being brushable. I don't think that you need to thin it to be this point, to like this thick or thin. You just want it to be brushable, because then it's like a little bit easier to manage, as long as you know how to pay attention to the drying. I think this is really the key here, is just you have to pay close attention. This is a specialty product, so unfortunately it's not as user-friendly or as easy to use as the rest of our stoneware glaze line. But it is a really, really cool effect, and it's really, really fun to play around with different clay bodies and temperatures and different colors and things like that.
So fun. Question about, actually back to the crackle. Would a blow dryer help the crackle better? So I guess, or maybe dry it, or maybe even putting the Mudcrack, dry it with a hair dryer, get it to dry faster. I don't know if it would make a difference.
The mud or the...
Yeah, the question was just, would a blow dryer help it crackle better? That's all I have. I'm not sure how it would just help it dry faster. That's all it would do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of confused if we're asking about the clear crackle or the Mudcrack.
Me too. So
Okay,
I think...
cool. Well, with the Mudcrack, I would not recommend putting a dryer on it. Like, it's already going to dry nice and fast. You want to slow that drying time down. With the clear crackle, blow dryer isn't going to affect the fired results. So the thing is, I guess if you do a blow dryer once it's fired, maybe, because you're causing
some heat on it. Yeah, maybe
a little bit. For the most part, the things that are really going to help that is just the thickness of the application, and then making sure that it doesn't fit the clay body, which is not usual.
Right. And I've got a question. What's the difference between Mudcrack and the Mako Cobblestone?
That is a wonderful question. The Mudcrack is our stoneware kind of cobblestone, I guess. So cobblestone, I don't think I have any samples here. The cobblestone is a glaze that should be used. Its ideal use is low fire. You put a base glaze of like foundations or stroke and coats, and then you put the mud or the cobblestone on top of it. So you got low fire clay, stroke and coat, and then cobblestone, and it cracks very similar to our Mudcrack glaze, but you're going to see the stroke and coat underneath it. And then if you're firing it to cone 6, we do recommend to just put it directly on the bisque if you like. And this is actually the cobblestone at cone 6 on a brown clay. So it's more like beady, like it's a little bit rounder, kind of pretty random, but it does kind of mimic the Mudcrack in a sense that the thicker the application, the more texture and dimension that you're going to get. At cone 6, you can just apply it directly to the bisque. But the main difference is that the Cobblestone is a low fire product that's supposed to be applied over a glaze, whereas the Mudcrack is a stoneware product that's made to be applied directly to the bisque. Great question. You get that a lot for sure.
I love the good question. So another one that's great is would Darvan be better for thinning than water?
I honestly have always just used water to thin. So you could definitely use Darvan because you definitely want the particles and everything to be suspended more. But typically it's basically the glaze setting up like this is really just the water evaporating out of the glaze. Like I'm not sure why this material just like sucks it up way more than any of our other glazes. But I can't answer exactly if Darvan would be better because I haven't personally tried it, but it's definitely, I don't think it would hurt anything to do it. I
don't think it would hurt it. The issue is the water is what's evaporated, not the Darvan. So the deflocculant is still in it. So you just could put water, but yeah, you could put Darvan in, and you know, also for brushability, Darvan makes it nicer.
Yeah,
but either works. But I do just use water mostly myself.
Yeah, it's like water.
What clay? I know what I have plenty of water. I don't have much Darvan, so that's usually how it goes in my life. What clay body did you use there for your examples? I know you got a bunch of different ones, but
yeah. So this is actually, so these are just some samples that I had around here. It's just like a white or a buff stoneware. It's a PRAI stoneware. So sometimes clay companies will send us clays to do tests on, and I throw a bunch of bowls with it. And these were just like the leftover bowls from that test. And then here I've got some like B mix. So I'm basically just trying to use a white stoneware clay for these samples that I showcase for you here. And then here, all of these tiles we slip cast in-house, but it's also with just like a white stoneware clay body. The only ones that are different are these samples here, which are just thrown with, this is just like a black stoneware. And then this is a black stoneware. I think these are all like pot clay bodies, I think, that they sent us. So kind of random, I guess.
All right, fantastic. We've got about 30 seconds left. I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to share quickly before we go. This was really fun.
We want to showcase the Himalayan salt results for...
Yes, oh yes.
We'll be at Infuca this year. I don't know the booth number off the top of my head, but I did want to showcase the glaze that we're going to be bringing there. So here is the Himalayan salt at cone 6, and here it is at cone 10. So this glaze has like a lot of variation to it, but I think that these tiles kind of encompass that a little bit. With the cone 6, we get this beautiful like light yellow with some pink and a little bit of rutile where it gets really heavy. And then at cone 10, we get this awesome gray color with some nice gloss pooling that happens here. And then I do have one sample at cone 10, and this is it with sandstone at cone 10.
Wow.
So you get a lot of grays and a lot of purples when you bring it up to higher temperature. And then the sandstone brings more purples into it. But this is just a really killer combo that I had in here. I wanted to showcase. And you can see the mobility. So this does move a lot at cone 10. But where it pools, it's so, so pretty.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing with us.
Of course.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Sadly, we're out of time for today. But this demo is recorded, so you guys can go back and watch the...
It'll take a little while to get it up, but wow, so many ideas to try Magma and Mudcrack, and lots of other information there too. And it's just been great having Carmen on here the last few days. If you missed yesterday's demo using Mako glazes and washes, go check that out. That's up and it'll be available forever. Also, if you're not following Mako on YouTube, you should. They have hundreds of videos with lots of little tutorials on there, and I know you'll get inspired and try so many new things from that. Okay, so thanks, Carmen, for being here with us. We loved having you. Is fine. So I don't know if y'all heard her. She was just signing off too. So next we're going to be coming back with me. I'm going to be doing a demo using Sandbow Studios Underglaze decals. So I've got my brand new Cardinals and Birches design. I made a platter with this one here. It's drying. Hopefully it'll be dry enough for us to see it, but we're going to make some mugs, and we're going to talk about making forms that are vertical and have volume when you're using these underglaze transfers, because a lot of folks have asked and have issues with them smearing and stuff. So we'll go through that next. So we'll be back at 12:30 for that. I'll see y'all then.